Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Myths and the Magic of Cultural Transformation. I'm Debbie Wiegand, the Director of Operations with the Greenhouse Project, and we appreciate you spending the next hour with us today. This session is being recorded, and we welcome all of you to put your name and your organization in the chat box, if you will. We are also going to be using the Q&A box for any questions that you might have. So as you think of those, please put those in the Q&A box. I especially want to thank THW for their collaboration in the webinar series leading up to today. What a pleasure it has been to work with Eric Krull and his team. They've just been fabulous. So thank you, Eric, Melinda, Jake, Alejandro. We've certainly enjoyed the webinar series, working with you, and we've learned a lot. So thanks again. So let's begin by talking today a little bit about how culture can impact design. If you'll change to the next slide. Culture is really a game-changing investment for organizations. And whether you are repositioning a campus or renovating buildings, maybe even a new build, there's a lot to consider when it's related to design and culture and how those two come together. So we're going to talk a little bit about those next steps. You can see here that there are lots of examples of older infrastructure, and this really represents a design that was a different time. It's not what we imagine today. So when organizations, companies have access to capital, that investment, when it's used to renovate or build new, even reposition a campus, it's important that it gets married up with culture in order to boost the return on investment. As we looked back at the webinar series, the question came up over and over: can I create greenhouse homes in an existing building when the community was built to a very different model of care? So the answer was, is, and continues to be sometimes. But it requires really a radical shift in our beliefs and our mindsets. And you know, if there was ever a time to embrace something different, that is probably now. The pandemic has certainly awoken in the senior living industry some new thoughts and new ideas. So how do you get closer to that radical shift? Let's take a look at our core values and these 6 core elements that we started off with. How close can you get? Well, it really depends on if you're willing to embrace comprehensive change. So if you go to the next slide, you can see our core values here. We start with Real Home, which is about the physical environment. That one makes a lot of sense. And there's Meaningful Life, which is really about the philosophy of care that happens. You know, staff think differently, but also elders' choice and decision-making is honored, and rhythms of the day become very normal. And then there's Empowered Staff, which is really about organizational redesign. That's about not necessarily adding more staff, but deploying them in some different ways. And the core elements, there's 6 of them. This is, you know, oftentimes where an organization says, well, I want to renovate or I want to do something new, but I don't quite know where to start, what to do, or how to do it. And these core elements speak to how you can go about marrying up not only design, but overlay it or sometimes underlay it with the program aspect of cultural transformation. And it really helps to an organization to figure out how to prioritize what's important. So you're going to hear today from a number of individuals and panelists. So this group of professionals has joined us today, and I asked them if they would please join me and turn on your cameras. I'd like to introduce you. They are here with us today. First, I'll mention Lauren Levant, who is the Vice President of Human Resources at Jewish Home Family. Thank you for joining us, Lauren. We also have Joel Anderson, who's the President and CEO of Blue Star Living. You'll hear from him in just a minute. Karla Oliver, the Executive Director at Fountains of Hope. Eric Krull, who many of you have seen before on our webinar series, Vice President at THW. And then our team, Marla DeVries, Director of Resource Development for Greenhouse, and our Senior Director, Susan Ryan at the Greenhouse Project. So you'll be hearing all of them as we move through this session today. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if you will, we're going to start off by talking with Joel Anderson. So welcome, Joel, and congratulations on your new position as President and CEO at Blue Star Living. I know you have 25 years experience, probably a little more than that, in the senior living field, and your new company is designed around development and operations. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts today on senior living and the impact that culture change can have. Most recently, you led a $100 million campus renovation and expansion in Florida at Village on the Isle, and you chose to partner with Greenhouse. So I'd love to hear kind of your story, your thoughts about the industry, and what that process was like. Why did you give us a call?
Yep. Well, thank you, Debbie, and thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to be able to speak and share my at least experience and story. And by the way, our company's new name of our company is LifeStar Living, and we're a Sarasota-based organization, very Florida-centric. We do focus on third-party relationships with development, operations management, strategic planning, master planning, those kinds of things. But that's all been driven over probably about the last 15 years of my work. And honestly, over the last decade, working with a lot of the household models in partnership with the Greenhouse Project. And so, you know, what's interesting about, and I'm going to really, I know I've got about 5 minutes to be able to speak, so I'm going to shove it in and give it as much as I can to be able to add value for all the folks listening in or watching today. But I really want to provide maybe 6 items. So write the 6 down. I think these are the key takeaways, at least as part of the value that I've seen with Greenhouse Project. But overall, I just would love for anyone to be able to question, is there anyone better than Greenhouse Project? They're thought leaders, they're subject matter experts when it comes to the small households, neighborhood experience, but it's not necessarily completely about design. Design is part of it. The elements of what Debbie mentioned at the very beginning are the things that attracted us to participate with them, because it goes through tried and true experiences of continuous improvement in operations management, how to interact and empower your staff, the things that, like I said, that Debbie mentioned. So here's my 6, Debbie, and so I'm going to share these. These are not necessarily in order of priority, but I think that this is something that really appealed to me. First of all, I mean, and I will say this too, is that the experiences go across the full continuum. And that was one of the things that we wanted to make sure that everyone understood. Our healthcare model was based on building a brand for our community that could fit across our full healthcare community continuum, which means assisted living, memory care, as well as our skilled nursing. And so I know that probably some of the slides will reflect all of those within our continuum. So number 1, was being about a culture-driven approach. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. We know that we're dealing with a society that is based on experiences. I mean, you know, whether it's you read the books about Starbucks selling coffee and creating an experience, but they're Disney creating an experience. So Greenhouse Project created an experience, not only for the customer, but also the employee. And we knew if we wanted to get highly engaged employees, we created, you know, something that just created that type of culture. So it's a very culture-driven approach. And the fact that we work within the not-for-profit sector, we realize the importance that all stakeholders have a vested interest in that. And that may be if you're a CCRC and you're prospecting to new independent living residents, that you can speak to that culture and what makes that different for them and what they will have available for them if they come to your community. That speaks to your donors and other stakeholders who would have an interest in being able to help your project succeed. So investors or whatever that may be if you're on the for-profit side. So I think that matters a lot. You know, what I mentioned as number 2 is service delivery approach drives quality and empowerment. And the most important aspects of when we are working within a greenhouse project is understanding that they have a lot of the secret sauce, if you will, of understanding the components that drive the quality. So you can be able to speak to that in your brand, but also with your reputation. Everything that matters is built within that. And also the thing that I love about it is the empowerment. You know, decentralizing your leadership in a way that if you're a large size campus and being able to, even the frontline employees feeling very empowered as a leader. And it's just amazing to see how people blossom and grow when you give them that level of empowerment. And it's not necessarily by license or certification. It's about being able to embrace a new concept and really drink the Kool-Aid and exercise on that to be able to help make decisions for that household. So I thought that was a very important part for ours. Obviously, my number 3 is it creates competitive advantage. Now, I really will say right now in today's world, and even where we were developing our community, competitive advantage is everything to us. But as we see in a post-COVID-19 world, this is a standard. We're going to have to look beyond, you know, the fact that it creates competitive advantage. It's an expectation for the future. And I really do think that Greenhouse Project has been preaching this for a number of years, but no one has necessarily completely listened to that story until now that they see, wow, what would have a small house or neighborhood concept done for us in a COVID-19 world? And I really think that has competitive advantage for you. The 4th one is, as I mentioned at the beginning, Greenhouse Project has decades proof of results, tried and true testing, refined and continuous improvement approaches. So it's not like Greenhouse Project that started over a decade ago and it's the same thing that you're pulling off the shelf. As they have globally introduced their projects and continue to work with their partners on things that continue to refine the processes. They were going through the Greenhouse 2.0 version whenever we actually engaged with them. And in the experience that we had, they continue to stretch it. You know, so you're basically just getting up to the principles of the things that they've tried and true over the last decade, but then also stretch you to bring you to another level higher. And I love that about them. My 5th one, it does work with new development and redevelopment. And so both projects that I worked with them on were both, one was a redevelopment of an 80,000 square foot building, and the other one was a brand new 60,000 square foot skilled nursing building. So it is something that works for both models. You have to be creative, and they work with you both on the development side the financial modeling side, and then the operations, implementation, getting to excellence, getting the buy-in from stakeholders that you need to have. And then, my last one, it's an ongoing collaboration and partnership. And so, even after we were really through our first phase of our consulting arrangement with Greenhouse Project, the next thing you know, we were involved with Project Echo and Embodied Labs. And so I just love the fact that Greenhouse Project is able to attract other innovations to them that help work with their partners to be able to continue, again, stretch or improve your operations. So, Debbie, I don't know if I took 5 minutes up, but I try to rattle through that as quickly as possible. There may be some questions at the end, but again, it's an honor to be part of this.
Well, Joel, thank you for those 6 points. I was taking notes as you were talking, and I think there's probably a lot of follow-up that we're going to have. So if you will come back and join us during the panel discussion, that would be awesome. And thank you for those points.
Thank you.
So next we have with us Karla Oliver. And Karla, it's a pleasure to have you today join us. I know you've been one of those people that has been involved in culture change. You embraced it, and you've done such a great job. So many of the things that Joel was talking about, I kept thinking of you. So you were involved in assisted living renovation. And so I just thought if we could kind of get some of your thoughts about cultural transformation. What was that experience like? What did you see happen as the executive director leading that charge?
Okay, first I will say that culture change is very daunting if you're doing it yourself. And being a part of Greenhouse and partnering with them, if you want to say your hand is being held through the whole process, it's a hand-holding process. Instead of getting a manual handed to you and read the manual, now take it back to your community, it's very different with Greenhouse because a tour is completed initially by Greenhouse. They'll come in and you have an assessment of where you are in culture change. What do we want to do? What are we trying to accomplish? So it's not just here you are, run with it. It's the hand holding, interviewing staff, interviewing residents, interviewing family members. So it's all the stakeholders involved that are part of the process, which is wonderful because you need the buy-in. And then once you have that survey, it's monthly calls with Greenhouse to see how are you doing? Where are you in the process? And I wouldn't call Greenhouse staff consultants, I call them partners, because a consultant normally comes in, evaluates and tells you what you're doing wrong. With Greenhouse, it's working through with the partners and seeing and being open and honest. What is working? What isn't working? Where are you having difficulties? And because the Greenhouse, this isn't their first rodeo, if you want to say, they're able to give ideas as to what obstacles are you encountering and giving ideas on how to accomplish them. So I would say that the value is in you're not doing it alone, and you've got proven leaders that are part of your team. And we all know culture change is not a race, and it's not a beginning and an end. It's a continuous, and working with the Greenhouse and knowing at Village on the Isle, we didn't want to lose our complete identity there because we had an identity for the area, and it was a merging of the great values of Greenhouse and the great values of Village on the Isle, and coming to solutions on how we can keep both going.
Well, thanks, Karla. I remember when we were out in Florida, there was there was renovation that had started to take place, and then you were involved in some education, beginning to apply it. And I remember you talked about a story where there was one home that had opened that hadn't gone through the education and another one that did. And you just felt like there was a different pulse. Can you talk a little bit about that? What you were seeing and hearing that was different?
Hugely different, that working with the staff on the one household that embraced it, after I came back with the education and saying, okay, we're going to hit this one household first and convert. And it was amazing from the staff and the residents on coming together as a team. And you had residents where sitting together, I'll use the example of the dining room. The residents are all sitting together in the dining room at one table, and they all became friends. They may not have known each other and lived in the same buildings previously, but they quickly became friends to where you had maybe 5 different residents initially. One was great with remembering names, so they used that resident to remind them who the names of the other residents and the staff were. One was always cheerful and cracked jokes and kept everything light. A third one was very good with what was going on in the community for engagement or activities. And then there was a gentleman who, he initially sat by himself at the bar area, and he would have his cup of coffee and read the paper, and the ladies invited him over, and he soon became the expert with social media. So he would Google things and he would read his newspaper, and he would sit and tell them what was going on in the newspaper, and then the menu, if there was a menu item that the residents didn't know, what is chicken cacciatore, that they could Google it, look at the picture, and be able to share it. But their meal changed from being, I eat, I get done, I leave, to their breakfast, lunch, and even dinner lasting an hour, hour and a half, and becoming more of a social hour. And maybe they didn't want to go to the planned activities because it was more important to sit in the dining room and converse with each other because they built this relationship. And the benefit also was not just that it kept from isolating and this gentleman came out, but if you had a resident that was a slower eater, they all sat. They didn't make her feel like she needed to finish and get to dessert because everyone else is on dessert, that it was really like a family. Let's wait, let's bring everyone in, and we'll sit until she's ready to eat her dessert and finish eating. And it made a difference on her weights and just being a part of something. So huge difference between, yeah, you have a household, but now you have the philosophies to go with the household.
Oh, it's a great story. Sounds like a lot of community building was happening and lots of good outcomes related to it.
Yes.
Thank you, Carla, for sharing that. And if you'll come back and join us during the panel discussion, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
So now I want to welcome Lauren Levant. Lauren is, as I mentioned before, the Vice President of Human Resources, and Lauren's at Jewish Home Family. Jewish Home Family never ceases to amaze me with y'all's dedication and tenacity and graciousness. You guys define high achievers, and we really appreciate all the stories that you've been able to share with us. Now, at Jewish Home Family, you've not really gone through the renovation or a new building, although that's part of your journey and your vision forward. But tell us about Jewish Home Family and how the aspect of cultural transformation has occurred and evolved even without the physical type renovation.
Thank you for having me, Debbie. Really, our journey started I'd say about 3.5 years ago. And we started, the president and CEO of our organization, Karla Elliott, introduced this idea to us. And the senior management team, we were really curious to see more and eager to learn more about this. And I remember our first trip to go see another community. It was actually in Rhode Island, I believe. A long trip for us, I may say, from where we are. And I just remember all of us who were there seeing it in action. It was almost like light bulbs went off in all of our heads because we truly got what Greenhouse was about. And we were just so excited to come back to New Jersey and to start educating our staff on what the Greenhouse model was about. So we actually have two properties. One is an assisted living and the other is our long-term care facility. So while we're under a huge construction project at the nursing home campus, we decided that there was an opportunity on our assisted living campus where we could start out and roll out the Greenhouse model to be our first go. So in our assisted living community, we have one side that is our general assisted living, and the other side was our memory care. And while we're not doing any structural changes to our memory, we call it memory lane, we have started to roll out the philosophies and the concepts of Greenhouse. And when we first did some education programs with the staff, and then we decided to roll out the communicating for success. And this was actually something that we felt was so vital, not just for the section we were going to do for Greenhouse, but for the entire community across the board. And after our communication for success, we opened it up for staff who were interested in becoming, Greenhouse calls them Shabazim. We have used a different term. And it was very interesting to see the different staff members who, I like to call it, they kind of got the Greenhouse bug. And they were so eager to learn more. And we set up some interviews, and there's two employees in particular. I remember them all, but two stand out to me the most. One of them, she came in a suit. She got her hair done. I mean, she was coming in as if this was the first time she was introducing herself to the Jewish home. And another gentleman, all he wanted to do, he wanted to work for the Greenhouse section just so that he could make his homemade soup from home. Now, of course, we had some kosher aspects that we had to work with him about, but it was the eagerness that they wanted to bring themselves also into the Greenhouse. So we went through our interview process, and as we were getting ready to start core training, unfortunately, the pandemic came about. And for those of you who are not aware, we're actually located in northern New Jersey, which was kind of part of the epicenter of the pandemic. So that kind of put some things on hold for us. It wasn't that we didn't value the Greenhouse core values, but we were really in a very different mode of what we had to do to protect our elders and protect our staff. So as things started to calm down, we kind of all regrouped, and we were able to say, okay, now it's time. We have to get the staff back on track for the Greenhouse model. So we started re-educating. And in September, actually, we did our first core training program. The president and CEO and also the director of nursing from the Rockley campus rolled out the 5-day program for the staff at the assisted living. And I can tell you what happened with that was that shortly after, it was one of the Jewish holidays called Sukkot. And they basically were building kind of a hut, which they had to decorate. And the staff who went part of the core training, they immediately took ownership of that and working with the elders. And it truly was the staff and the elders who were actually decorating the sukkah, which prior to that, this was all the staff that was really doing it or volunteers coming in from the community. And we missed that component of including the elders in the process. And then shortly after, we made some other changes, how we were serving our meals. Traditionally, the residents, the elders would come for breakfast at the time that we set, not at the time that they wanted. So they started to change all of that. And now I can tell you that breakfast, typically by elder choice, starts around 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's been going to 11 o'clock in the morning. And it's several reasons why it's now a 3-hour meal, because the elders are choosing when to wake up, but more as equally as important is that the elders are choosing to stay at the table with the staff. We call them yadim, and it's more of a conversation. It's more of a connection. And I'm hearing from the staff members that they truly are getting to know the elders in a much different way. Before it was so task oriented, and now it truly is about what the elder wants and what direction they want to take things. They've also made changes also with our activities program. It used to be that here's your calendar, these are the activities for the day, and it's changing. It's not just about the elders saying to the staff what they would like to do, but it's increasing the involvement between the elders themselves. And we're seeing how the friendships between the elders who have been basically living together for several years, it's a whole new dynamic to the kind of relationship that they're having with themselves. We have also been able to start doing, and of course it has to be Zoom because of visitation restriction. We have had some Zoom calls also with the family members of the elders who are in the greenhouse. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep calling it memory lane. That's where it is right now. And it's just interesting to see, you know, the families are coming around slowly. There was definitely some challenges, but then there were also a lot of family members who fully embraced this new way of us being able to deliver our services and see how we're enhancing the elders' lives, which is really what our goal was always from day one.
Terrific, terrific examples. I can just hear so much now about the relationships that were happening. And I don't know, you know, both you and Carla shared some stories around meals, and it just feels like that's a pretty important aspect of all of this. So Lauren, before we bring all of our panelists back to have a conversation, did you add staff to do this?
We actually did not. We were adding, it was with our existing staff. We're still in the process of tweaking some of it. It was adding some responsibility to our staff, but I have to say, they're embracing it. They want to do more. They're also talking about their own personal skill sets that, you know, this being a Yadim is actually allowing them to do. That it's not just provide the ADL care, they can bring a piece of themselves into the experience that they're having with the elders. So we have not had to add staff at all. It's just been about reallocating some responsibilities.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm going to ask you to stay on, but if I could have all of our panelists come back and turn their cameras on, we're going to have a bit more of a conversation. There we go. Thank you. So everyone, you know, this has been a tough and trying time in senior living, as we all know, as you know. And we're talking about culture change. There's so many myths related to what does it really take to do this? Does it take more money, more staff? You know, why are more people investing in this? I'd like to ask you guys to think about and respond to what are you hearing and what are you learning when it comes to cultural transformation in this pandemic? What do we need to bring forward? What do we need to let go of?
Joel, do you want to go first or do you want?
Go ahead. Ladies first.
Southern hospitality. I think during the pandemic and everything, and hopefully we don't go through a twin-demic, but we really need to hold on to that deep knowing. We really need to hold on to the skills that we've been working so hard to train everybody. You know, it's very easy, and I'm going through core training right now with Marla, so I'm going to say it's very easy for that creep and the dragon, you know, to kind of come in for us to go to our old habits. But I think we need to slow down a little bit and remember what the core values are and how we can work around it. This is an opportunity for us to think out of the box with still keeping our main objective as the main objective.
Thanks for that, Lauren.
You know, I'll just say, I think strategically, you know, you don't need to be waiting till COVID-19 era is over to start making decisions. I mean, you know, I won't say it's a perfect opportunity, but, you know, to be able to see yourselves beyond COVID-19, knowing what experiences, I think COVID-19 has taught all of us a lot of lessons of things that we never thought that we could be able to accomplish in operations until we're having to deal with this pandemic. Now it requires us to re-engineer some of the ways that we operate. But, you know, with the declining census in most of our buildings and everything, if there was any retooling of a repositioning that you needed to do, this is probably a good time to be thinking about that as you start to roll out. I mean, most projects, like what I believe we all come from, are reasonably capitalized to be able to make these types of transitions. I do believe that, you know, the traditional models are going to be very much stretched in the future. And most of them are running off of 50 days cash on hand or less in a lot of the skilled and even assisted living environments, even new assisted living communities. But we just actually inherited a new project right now that has a declining census in its memory care, has 38 units with 2 households. So they intended to do household, but they really poorly executed. And so we basically are going through right now, it has an occupancy of about 50%. And we are actually looking at breaking it into 3 different households to get it down to where they're manageable households, very custom and personalized services. And then you have that dedicated staff to those households. So again, I think the pandemic right now probably has everybody stopping in their tracks, trying to you know, wait, see how things happen. But honestly, this will be an opportunity that you should be making good strategic steps to what's post-pandemic your operations can capitalize off of.
I will add that being in small households and the dining experience, initially we all had to shut our dining rooms down, but now we were able to open up the dining room quicker because it isn't large numbers in the dining room. So being in that small household, even though we had, if you want to call it the lockdown, we still were able to socialize. Once we kind of said, okay, yes, this pandemic is here, it's not going anywhere, we got to get back to normalcy and get the residents out of their apartments. It was easier to do because of the small households versus one large dining room. And now how do you manage to keep everyone safe? So that is a plus. And I would say the infection control, we all want to be clean and safe. And so that's where I think we got to watch the creep of being institutional and saying, okay, let's reevaluate this. What can we do? But it's actually more manageable within their households to stay safer and to keep the pandemic out.
Eric, this feels like it's kind of right in your wheelhouse when we think about all of those diagrams that we saw earlier in our webinar series. What are you hearing from people in senior living about what they feel like they need to do differently now related to this pandemic?
It's interesting. I'll play off of what Joel mentioned. The first 3 months, I remember getting phone calls about March 2nd first. They were really asking, you know, what do we do? Should we do something with our mechanical systems? And it was all the technical stuff. And honestly, all of us couldn't really advise them. I started calling engineers, and this was just way too new. You know, certain things have been done in hospitals, but this isn't a hospital, this is one's home. And so it went through probably 30, 45 days of just getting our arms around a lot of the technical stuff, trying to support our clients. And a lot of them had big nursing homes, 200 and 300 beds. And a lot of them were up in the Northeast and right in the midst of this. So once we got through that, a lot of it was, the conversations was, okay, post this, start thinking about things you can help us with. And a lot of the conversation was around, we think we have to look at the infection control, the semi-private rooms, and how we need to somehow maybe right size now. I hadn't heard that in years because we've all been thinking about that's probably the right thing to do to try to create a home, and the challenges, the financial side and reimbursements and all that. So that lasted till about June and July. In the last couple of months, now I'm actually getting into planning. They said we have to plan for the future now. We've now learned a lot, and we think we know how we can do it. And then I'm hearing some, and maybe Joel and others on the phone are getting calls or looking into opportunities to get funding to help with the situation, which we've all heard cut, and it just leaves no money left for the environment to try to improve this. So I'm encouraged that this may be the best opportunity to really understand how the small households actually will help us all. I mean, I hate to say this has forced us into this. It's a shame this has forced us, but I'm encouraged. So to me, it's some light at the end of the tunnel, I hope, for everyone.
But Susan, you're certainly a person who is talking with a lot of leaders across the country, thought leaders, providers, and then you've got this vast amount of experience in greenhouse and small house. What are you hearing is important as we look to the future?
I think probably one of the things that was so interesting to me was the Coronavirus Commission, the administration's commission to take a look at the coronavirus. And they had stakeholders, about 25 different stakeholders, really kind of assess what do we need to do. And one of those recommendations pertinent to this conversation was private rooms, that we really need to make sure that those living in nursing homes have access to a private room. I think for the first time ever, and I would say globally, because I'm having conversations literally around the globe, that more and more people are really taking a look at the physical environment and how we operationalize it. What is that culture? And the pandemic, I mean, kind of to your point, Eric, it has really kind of exposed the flaws in a system that said semi-private was good enough, or some of the things that we have traditionally done is okay, and that it's not okay. And when a high percentage of deaths are occurring in these environments and we can do something about it, this is the time for us to sit up and take notice and endeavor to do things differently.
Well, thanks for that insight. And, Marla, I know we've got some questions in the Q&A box that you're going to help us with. But before we do that, you do a lot of work in the area of sustainability. And when I think about this pandemic and the pressure that it has put on providers, on elders, on families, we've made so many strides, not enough, but we've made a lot of strides in implementing culture. How does an organization go about sustaining that so that we don't slip back? What's that approach look like? What's important to know?
Well, I think both Lauren and Carla mentioned it, that what we call the dragon, but just to know that there is this kind of institutional default that because we were raised, many of us, in a pretty traditional way of doing things. And so to make strides and then to sustain it really takes a lot of intention. And we use the framework of beliefs, behaviors, and systems. And we look at it when you're making a change, but then how also do you sustain it? So You know, and I was thinking about it earlier. It's like when you think about elders' access to outdoors, you know, there's beliefs behind that, why that's important, right? Do we believe that that's important? And then there's behaviors. Well, we want the staff to advocate for that to happen and to create the time and to facilitate that process. And then there's the systems. So what do our policies say? Are the doors locked or not locked? And so for any change, you've got to look at those three components, beliefs, behaviors, and systems, and see, are we where we need to be? And then if there's the slippage, which area are we finding that slippage, and how can we then, you know, course correct? And I think we often, and I do education, so I'm a huge proponent, advocate of education, but we often put our eggs in that basket, and that's not enough. We've got to have some real intention around how do we sustain the culture and put as much energy into that as we do in educating staff and equipping them for success.
Oh, well said, well said. If people are coming up with questions, please put them in our Q&A box. And Marla, would you share with us kind of what some of those questions are so far?
Sure. So one is, what design changes did the panelists make in their work with Greenhouse? So specific to the physical environment, what design changes were made?
So I think, Carla, you probably had more to do with design changes with the renovation that happened, because there was also skilled nursing that was brand new. And Lauren, you guys are planning for it, but haven't quite got there yet. So what were those changes that you saw that I guess made the biggest impact?
The space for the residents in each household, instead of going down to central services, bringing the services to the residents. Yes, we took a hit on occupancy, future occupancy, because we had to give up the apartments to make the living room, the dining room, the family rooms. So there were the design changes there, and bringing the kitchens or pantries up to each of the households. So it was a high-rise 5-story building, and bringing the households on each floor. So floor 2 through 5 had to have the occupancy change.
And I would add to that, there's a lot of right sizing that's going on in senior living today. So double rooms, long corridors, it just seems to be a bit of the past. What else do we have, Marla?
So life feels overwhelming right now with COVID. What can we do now to support culture change and allow the team to have some quick wins? So kind of some of those short-term, low-hanging fruit, so to speak.
I would say listen to, if you're empowering your staff, listening and going to the staff and asking for their input. I think with the COVID, we all got scared and said, let's do the shutdown, let's do, make us a safe place. But the staff themselves in each of the households came forward and said, can we do this with our residents so that we aren't all, staying isolated in our apartments? So I would say listen to your staff, because you've empowered them. That's quick wins, because they're front line. They're right there with the residents, the elders, and they hear it every day from them. So listening to them is reinforcing the philosophies of the greenhouse.
I think what's
And
also with the Jewish, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask you, Lauren, I wanted you to weigh in. I think I'm just so struck that in the middle of a pandemic, you launched Core Education, and your CEO and your director of nursing engaged in that. So to the question that said we're overwhelmed and how in the world can you do any of this stuff? So I'd love for you to speak more about them.
And that's actually, I was just going to address, you took the words out of my mouth. We're on the
Good.
same wavelength. I think it did come down to timing. So when we restarted everything, we were starting to see things come into, a dip. We gave the staff, listen, at the time what we were going through, we had to suspend vacation time for the staff. We needed all hands on deck. Then around June and everything, we lifted that up and we were really encouraging all of our staff members, this is the time, take your break, how much we appreciated everything that they did wholeheartedly. So we gave the staff a chance to recharge for themselves. A lot of them, they never even had the chance to mourn their own personal losses, during the pandemic. So we got at a time where we felt like everybody was starting to feel re-energized. And that's when we said, now we have to hit the button and start the re-education, and start all of this in servicing again and start to bring everybody back together as a group and as a true family. And it has worked beautifully at the assisted living. We're seeing it up here on the Rockley campus as well. You really have to recognize when it is that you need to give your staff that chance to recharge.
And just to piggyback, because there have been a couple comments, there was one in the chat box about, the term that Lauren gave, Yadid, and what it means. And so the response is, it means beloved friend. And so I'll just say, words matter. And so when you think about short-term wins, if you want to transform a culture, you got to look at what's the language that we're using. And what are those subtle ways that we can start to, if somebody says, my job, I'm a beloved friend, wow, that puts a different light into what I do each and every day. So, don't discount the power of words.
Thank you. Those were great words to wrap up with. I want to thank all of you on the panel today for spending time with us and for your words of wisdom and your dedication to what we're all about. So thank you so much. We're going to move forward. A lot of times people have questions and they'd like to learn more about, how can I shape the culture of my organization? How do we make that work? And so I'm just going to share some thoughts with you about the kinds of services that Greenhouse uses to help transform operations. And when you think about the Greenhouse Project, there is a level of research that has gone into what we do about 17 years now. And so there's a preponderance of experience that we're able to leverage. Janet, if you'll go to the next slide, we talk a little bit here about what some of those things are. And there's access to the thought leaders. Some of the people that you saw in this panel today are so willing to share their experiences, their advice, what to do, what not to do, what's worked well. All of that is part of what happens when you're partnering with us. And Marla mentioned education. There's a tremendous amount of tools and resources that have been developed that people are able to access. Joel talked a lot about vision and strategy. That goes into cultural transformation. This isn't just about building a building. It's also about investing in people. And Lauren, Joel, Carla, all of them talked about the importance of what goes into conversations related to visioning and the kind of analysis that needs to be done. So those are the types of things that Greenhouse brings forward. We collaborate with people on change process and operational systems. It's one thing to look at those 6 core elements that we brought forth. It's another thing to not just, for example, create a front door, but how do you operationalize and leverage the value of what that front door represents. And I would say in a pandemic, there's been a lot that we've learned. But those are some of the operational sides to culture that go hand in hand with design. There's also financial modeling that we help do. You heard a couple of times now, there's a myth that this takes more staff, and it doesn't. It's about reorganizing and believing differently in how we deploy staff. So these are just some examples of the services that we use to help organizations transform their operations and bring forth cultural transformation. And on the next slide, I love this picture. We say oftentimes don't run alone. Cultural transformation, it's not rocket science, but it is hard work. And we encourage you, just as you reach out for a partner when it comes to designing a building, we'd love to work with you when it comes to designing culture change. So don't run alone. There's a lot of things that continue to happen with the Greenhouse Project. And so we want to share with you on the next slide that if you liked what you've heard during these series and today, stay tuned. We've got a couple of workshops that are coming up the first quarter of 2021. One's a development workshop around building greenhouse homes. There's another one around cultural transformation where we'll unpack some of these core values and how they apply forward. Also, November the 5th, on the next slide, you'll see that we have an echo, a COVID echo, where we've got some greenhouse providers. They're going to talk about social isolation and returning nursing home visits during a pandemic. So that's November 5th at 3 p.m. And you can go to our website to register. And if you haven't had the pleasure of listening to our podcast, we have a podcast that's out, Elevate Elder Care. And there's some fabulous recorded sessions. We also have one that's coming up that you can see here. And Louise Aronson will be talking about elderhood, ageism, and COVID. So if you like podcasts, or even if you've not tried one, try this out. It's exciting conversations, a bit provocative at times, but certainly worth the listen. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us, and we look forward to talking with you again in the near future. Thanks. Bye-bye.